A lot of things have been happening around the world that we have not commented on, and based upon what happened today and people's reaction to it, I would like to take a moment out and comment, particularly since this evening on Yahowah Radio we're going to return, and we may even return in the second half of our program today, to the revelations that Yahowah provided in Yahowah, beginning with chapter 1. I think we're approaching right now the 5th or 6th verse of the first chapter. But today, actually it was last night, 5 Dallas police officers were shot and killed by a U.S. Army reservist. He was a black man. He said that he wanted to kill white people, particularly white police officers. And the U.S. Congress has responded by black members getting up before empty seats and crying, saying, when are we going to do something about guns in this country? So I would ask the first question. The march that took place in Dallas last night, it was in response to 2 gun shootings. One in Minnesota, your state, Scott, and the other one was in Louisiana. Who was holding those guns?
It's police.
Both cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both cases, those guns were owned by the citizens of this country, and they were wielded by police officers of this country.
Right.
Can you tell me how infringing on the U.S. Constitution and constraining people's rights to bear arms would have had any effect on the police using their guns to shoot 2 innocent individuals?
They have not. In fact, they've encouraged them to even be more reckless.
Would that parade in Dallas have taken place, which was predicated entirely on what happened in Minnesota and New Orleans and the day previous, had the police not shot those 2 individuals?
No.
So is the problem that individuals in America can own guns, or is the problem that our police are far too militaristic, far too vicious, far too irresponsible?
It's definitely the latter. The latter.
It's obvious. So why isn't anyone saying that the police? You know, I want to tell you. I want to go back one step before we come to this conclusion. To be so stupid, to be so irrational, to be so out of touch with reality, to be so grotesquely immoral, to think that the proper response to a number of people, let's not just take those 2 police officers that shot the 2 people day before yesterday, but let's back up and think of the murderer of Tamir Rice, the young man that was playing with a toy gun that was shot in cold blood within a second of the time that police whisked up before him.
They did a drive-by on him.
They did a drive-by
on a 12-year-old boy. Yes.
But a man who was choked to death for trying to put down a fight in New York City and said, "I can't breathe."
Eric Gardner.
Eric Gardner. The list is long. But what kind of a moron? What kind of a moron? Oh yeah, the one in Cincinnati pulled over for a tail light.
Professor or whatever.
Right. Yeah. What kind of a moron would think that the proper response to somehow sanctioning and holding these individuals who worked in different cities accountable would be to go out and kill people who had nothing to do with the choices they had made? I mean, that's like Muslims deciding that because they did not like the fact that the U.S. intervened to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait rather than allowing fundamentalist Muslims to engage in jihad, that the appropriate response was flying planes into our buildings and killing people that had nothing to do with that decision.
You asked what kind of a moron would do that?
Yeah.
Probably one that wants to be in politics. Probably one that's already in Congress. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, obvious one that was in the U.S. Army Reserves.
One What's the American attitude that always thinks that if we shoot a bunch of people up, innocent people, that they're not going to respond?
Yeah, or that the proper response to violence is violence.
Yeah.
And we all think that we had to engage in Vietnam because of the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, the Gulf of Tonkin never occurred. But you know, we got to teach them a lesson. You know, we thought that we had to engage in World War I because the Germans had sunk the Lusitania, when in fact we arranged it to be sunk. We had to engage in the Spanish-American War because they sunk the Maine when they had nothing to do with sinking the Maine. Why is it that we're so prone that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't have, therefore we need to strike him? Why is it that we think that the solution to everything, the proper response to everything, is violence?
We are that arrogant jerk that y'all keeps talking about.
When Yahowah said that he had to reset humanity, that he had grieved that he'd even created us, that he needed a fresh start or there was no hope, what was the offense? Was it that people weren't religious enough?
No.
Was it people were not political enough?
Or they didn't have enough guns?
That they weren't governed properly? No, there was a single reason.
Killers.
We became
Killed
killers.
everything.
Our response to everything was to kill. That's why the flood occurred. And that's our response today. So this idiot, Mr. Micah Johnson, in Dallas, who is part of the U.S. Army Reserves, thinks that the appropriate response to those idiots in police officers in New Orleans and Minnesota that murdered those innocent individuals, that the proper response is to kill other innocent individuals? Now, I want to spend a moment, Scott, and talk about the four things that I think have caused what we're witnessing in America. And it's not just at a personal level, it's also at a national level. America's use of drones to kill without due process, without trial, internationally, as if the world were ours to decide life and death, is part of this. But so are all of the mass shootings that we're witnessing around the world. I'm going to share with you that I think there's four reasons for it. There may be more, and you may challenge some of these reasons. It is my opinion, my conclusion, that the primary reason that we have witnessed such an increase in horrific acts is a direct consequence of the indoctrination of socialist secular humanism and of political correctness and of no accountability, no sense of right and wrong, where lies are promoted as if they were true and the truth cannot be told. People can no longer execute sound judgment. And precluded from executing sound judgment, they do stupid things like this moron in Texas, like the two cops in New Orleans and Minnesota. I think it is the single greatest factor in the dumbing down of our society to the point that there is no sense of accountability, no sense of responsibility, no sense of right and wrong, no ability to make a rational, moral, or appropriate decision.
Nothing that happens to me is my fault.
That is
Somebody always does something to me.
Correct. You know, there was a book that came out just recently by a woman who served in the Bush administration. It was a huge proponent of No Child Left Behind, which is an unmitigated disaster, and national testing standards, which are also unmitigated disasters. Really, it took what was already a failing academic system and made it far worse. And she has come to the conclusion, she wrote in a book, she says, you know, that it's unfair to evaluate teachers on this basis of national standards and testing because there's the common denominator in poor testing or good testing is poverty. Poverty or affluence. Affluent students do well. Poor students do poorly. And I read that and said, the person who wrote this article is incapable of thinking. It has nothing to do with poverty. It has nothing to do with wealth. That test does not know if that student is dressed in nice clothes or is tattered. It does not know if that person came from a lavish home or from the street corner. It does not know. It does not know if it has a credit card and folding money in the wallet or a few jangling coins in the pocket. It does not know those things. But what I can tell you is that we have created a culture in this country. And it's a direct product of the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. And I'm going to say that it is the second aspect in this problem, where we have a dependency culture that thinks that they are entitled. It's not my responsibility, you owe me. And it became an economic incentive to have children. And in the African American community in particular, over 85% of children are born outside of a nuclear family with a married husband and wife. And there's no example of getting up, getting dressed, going to work, showing up on time, doing a job, being responsible. What there is an example of is being lazy, of opting out, of doing nothing, of shirking responsibility, of thinking it's other people's responsibility. And that has destroyed the character of generations of people. And that's the reason why those who are impoverished are often, now it's not 100% the case. There are some people who go through some rough times, and they're impoverished for no fault of their own, and they are willing to work, and have worked, and will work again. But in the case of many, it's generational. And it's been promoted by a society that rewards failure and punishes success. It has created this climate. So there is no example. There is no nuclear family of fathers and mothers setting the right example and making sacrifices on behalf of their children. I'm going to give you a third reason. Alcoholism is on the rise, but drug use, both prescription and illegal, is out of control. America never should have waged war on drugs. It made a situation vastly worse. And today, the opiate use, both for prescription and now through illicit drugs, is a prairie fire. I mean, we're dealing with something that is growing exponentially. We have a very significant percentage of the population that is operating impaired. They're inebriated. They're intoxicated. They're drugged. What little capacity they may have once had to execute good judgment, they can no longer do it. They're out of their minds. Now, there's another reason. We have created an artificial world, whether in our reality TV and or it's our video games or the movies. We've created an artificial world. You know, and particularly in the video games, you know, you can have a first-person shooter and you can go kill people and you can get killed, but you just hit the reset button, you start all over again. It's kind of like flying a drone. You lose a sensitivity to the consequence of your actions and of the value of life under those circumstances. I think those are the factors. I think those are the things that we should be discussing. Now, there's one other thing I want to say, and I'd love to have your guys' comments. If a black person is killed violently, what is the likelihood that they were killed by another black person?
About 80%.
You're close. It's 90.
Okay.
So if Black Lives Matter, 90% of the time that a black person is killed violently in a crime in America, they're killed by another black person. The animosity, the rage ought not be at whites, as Obama and others are trying to make it out to be. 90% of the time, according to the Department of Justice, if a black person is killed in America, they're killed by another black person. If a white person is killed in America, are they typically killed by another white person or by a black person?
There again, it's probably more racial.
Nope.
Black.
Nope. 70%. 70% of whites that are murdered by fellow whites. Now, a small amount, relatively small amount. So most crime has nothing to do with race. 70% of white murders are perpetrated by whites, and 90% of black murders are perpetrated by blacks. There's no racism there. None. So it's only a potential of 30% of Caucasian murders and 10% of black murders that are racial. And of those murders, which would be about 33% of murders in the country, what percentage of those murders is, as the president and everyone that seems to be marching on behalf of the black victims would suggest, is perpetrated by racist whites against blacks versus racist blacks against whites? If a black and a white person are engaged in a violent act, what percentage of the time is the white individual the perpetrator, and what percentage of the time is the black person the perpetrator? Now, I'm just sharing with you facts. These are all from Department of Justice. You can look them up yourselves. Mm-hmm. There's no opinion here. There's no bias here. These are just the facts. What percentage of black on white crime or white on black crime is perpetrated by the black versus the white individual?
Probably much greater by the black, perpetrated by the black community.
8 times out of 10.
Uh-huh.
8 times out of 10. I read an article today that said that they were protesting because of unfair treatment and biased treatment by the Department of Justice. Over the last 20 years, the Department of Justice has looked at the average number of black suspects that have been prosecuted and convicted versus white. Because if race mattered, and you look at the same crimes, and you looked at the percentage of whites versus blacks that were convicted of those crimes, you could say there was a bias in conviction rates. The white is 10% more likely to be convicted than black. Now, 10% really isn't significant, but rather than the black individual being more likely to suffer an injustice and to be convicted than the white, it's the other way around. Now, it is also true that of those convicted, the black individual typically receives a 10% longer sentence. Right. Now, I'm going to tell you that since those things are offsetting, it means that there is no racial prejudice in the justice system, and 10% either way would be insignificant overall to make a case, regardless if they were. But I would much prefer to be on the side of 10% fewer convictions than I would be bothered by a 10% longer sentence. So a lot of things to think about there, none of which are part of the national discourse. What's causing it? What can we do to stop it? What are the actual realities that we're dealing with here? And yet there's no discussion on any of that.
No. When I grew up, morals and manners were taught by everybody. You know, I mean, it's, whether you went to church or not, it was irrelevant. Your parents taught you that. You were confronted by your football coaches.
Right.
This is the right thing to do. This is the wrong thing to do.
Correct.
Came up in a society as yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, which is polite to me. So it didn't, and it was kind of ingrained. That was our culture.
Yeah, sense of right and wrong.
What your race was, everybody was treated pretty much the same way. Everybody got a whooping if they needed it or whatever, and I'm not encouraging everybody to whoop somebody. Yeah. But I'm just saying that was the nature of the beast. And,
my exposure has been that a very small minority of Caucasians are racist. Now, I've employed a lot of people, and I know a lot of people. And, I've done radio and everything. I have pretty good contact with a lot of people. I've traveled in over 150 countries around the world. And there's not a lot of people that have, engaged with as many people as I have. I would say that a very small, I've met people that are racist, and I'm always adverse to them. I think that anybody that makes a decision about somebody based upon their skin color is making a horrendous choice.
That's a good reason.
That's not a good reason. Now, my experience is that a minority of Caucasians are racist. I do not think that is the case in the African American community, and I know it for a fact it's not the case in the Arab community.
Well, no.
Most Arabs are extraordinarily racist.
Mm-hmm.
Most African Americans are extraordinarily racist. This man that says, I want to kill white people, his sentiments, his racism, is not that uncommon in that community. We have a problem. We have a serious, serious problem. And this problem has nothing to do with guns. Oh, it does in one respect, but the wrong way. We have way, way, way too many federal, state, and local authorities who are armed. And we have way too great an integration between our national surveillance and spy agencies, our military, our federal agents, and our state and local police. Too much integration. They act too similarly. Too many of them come out of the same military mindset. They're way overly armed, and they're way too prone to violence. And America has become an extraordinarily militaristic state.
There haven't been too many armies in history that are armed as well as our police force.
No.
This is a military. It's not a police force. These guys have everything.
They do. And yet what we're going to hear is that the problem in Dallas is that a citizen, although he was, they'll not speak of the fact that he was in the U.S. Army Reserve.
Mm-hmm. Somebody trained him.
Had a military type weapon, and he didn't. An AR-15 is not a military type weapon. It's not a fully automatic weapon. The military have fully automatic weapons, and you have things a lot more powerful and a lot more capable than an AR-15. And long rifles are a substantial minority of the weapons used in mass killings. But they'll blame that. They'll blame the military-style weapon. They'll cry and say that, America's gun laws. But, the reason, there's really two reasons that Jefferson wanted even more than he got in the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is worded in a certain way to convey a very important message. And it says that it's military-type weapons that must be held and kept, owned by the citizenry if there's any hope for them to be free. Because if only the military and the police have guns, they don't have any freedom. The bottom line. The second issue with Jefferson is that there's only one thing Jefferson opposed more than an established military, and that was the central bank.
Yeah.
But it was his opinion, and I think he was correct in this, and this is what he wrote, that the central bank does not happen without an established military. that the establishing of a military and the deployment of that military is what necessitates a central bank to fund its endeavors. It's essentially what Yahowah said. He said, that you want a human to govern you. If you want a human to govern you, if you want a government, you need to understand the first thing that person is going to do is going to take your sons to serve in their military, and then they're going to take your money to equip them, to buy weapons for them, and then number three, they're going to use them. They're going to deploy them, which is going to require them to take even more money from you. It's exactly what Yahowah said would happen if we chose human government. It's exactly what we're witnessing. And so Jefferson wanted the population to be armed, because if the population is armed, there is no chance whatsoever under any circumstances that any foreign foe can invade and occupy the country. Your freedom is determined by your citizenry, not by a military. You do not need a military to protect your borders and to keep your country free of occupation if your citizenry is armed. And so an armed citizenry was a guarantee that you would not have to have an established military. That's why the Second Amendment is written the way it is. Have you heard anybody present
Never.
that argument?
No.
But it's irrefutable. And there is no question that Jefferson made both quotes. And there's no question that his discussions with Madison were in this regard. And that his only opposition to the U.S. Constitution is it did not preclude an established military. He thought it did preclude a central bank because it limited the U.S. government, to only coinage.
The Second Amendment is also the only amendment that they ever question how he wrote it. Like, there's no other amendment that they're like, well, he probably didn't mean it that way. He meant to write it this way. Right. Every other amendment is good. It's this one that they're like, well, he wrote it wrong.
He wrote it wrong. They never cite how it's written. You've never heard any person who wishes to restrict guns ever recite the amendment as it's written, where it specifically says that a trained and equipped militia is essential to a people's freedom. Therefore, there can be no infringement on the people's right to keep and bear arms. And that's how it's written.
Also, you were talking about what keeps us, helps our freedom. Obviously, like you said, it's the guns. But we also have these two things. There's these two huge bodies of water. I think they're the largest bodies of water in the known galaxy that are on both our coasts.
Of course, the Canadians and the Mexicans have a menacing, invasive military that we need. Terrible history of invasion. And of course, I think I'm sure there's at least 15 aircraft carriers that are operated by the Bahamians.
Which we've talked on Shattering Myths.
Maybe the Hawaiians have canoes. Oh no, we annexed Hawaii without their consent. So maybe the world should be against the United States like it's against Russia for Crimea, based upon Hawaii. Nah, let's not go there. So here we are. We are not only becoming, in fact, we probably are vastly worse than the violent and deadly perpetrators that Yahowah sought to wipe out 5,000 years ago during the flood. We don't have a clue as to how we got here or what we can do to resolve the problem. We don't even know what the problem is.
Well, you can't think you're never going to get there.
No. I read something a couple days ago that has, maybe 3 days ago, that has completely and totally devoured my time. And it's an example of when you read something, when you see something, you just read over it, or do you think, what does that really mean? So as I had mentioned before the break, I read something a few days ago. It was actually translated a few days ago. And I first just read it. So, I'm going to try to understand what these words mean. And then it just gripped me. Now, over time, in fact, we're right now beginning our review of Yahowah, Isaiah chapter 1. And we're going to go through all through 1 and all through 2. And what you do not know now, but what you do know now, is that God said that I set up, and my plan, and what I did initially, was to raise children as a family. I lifted them up. I gave them every possible beneficial and nurturing thing I could possibly provide to them. And then they rejected me. God tried to establish a family relationship, and man rejected them. And then what we will find out is that everything that God criticizes from that point on is religious in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And you go all the way through chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Yahowah, Isaiah. And what you have is God constantly and consistently criticizing religion.
Yeah.
Then he says this, indeed, behold, henna. Look up and pay attention. The upright pillar of the tabernacle, Yahowah, of the spiritual implements, is removing from Jerusalem and Yehuda the support which upholds life, the provisions which are extended by the shepherd's staff, all the supplies of bread and all the supplies of water. So initially, my normal way, I look at the details and I said, okay, I want to know what henna means and whether or not henna is important here. And I write the entire rest of the chapter is on henna, which means look up and pay attention. When it's used, how it's used, why it's used, what it means. I studied a little bit about the upright pillar, which is the Edon, upright pillar of the tabernacle, the foundation, that holds up the tent of the witness. I thought that was interesting. I tied Yahowah's name to henna. And then I looked at the three ways that Meshen was written in this text. Meshen, Meshenah, Mashan. And noticed that two were masculine, one was feminine. And recognized that Yahowah, as our Heavenly Father, projects a masculine persona as our Father, as the set-apart spirit, feminine, and as the Son, masculine. I said, probably something of interest there. But then as I pursued henna, I said, there's two questions here that need to be asked. We need the answer to two questions. If Yahowah says that he is now withdrawing, he is removing the provisions that uphold life, what are they? What are the provisions that uphold life? And number two, how do we get them back? And he has spent now 2 chapters saying, because you are religious, you have not only rejected me, but now saying, because you're religious, I'm going to withhold the provisions that uphold life.
But he has to.
But what are they?
Well,
what are they? And what is it? What are they? And how do we get them back?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to turn from one house and go back to the original house instead of Satan's house.
Yeah.
You got to walk away from it. I mean,
yeah. Well, you know what they are?
Sure.
Yeah.
Relationship. You got to walk with God.
The five conditions of the covenant,
mm-hmm.
and the first 4, particularly the first 2,
mm-hmm.
of the Mikra, the invitations to be called out and meet with God.
Yeah.
Those are the provisions.
Right.
And since the Mikra is a subset of the conditions of the covenant, the third condition of the covenant and the Mikra are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
So it just all gets down to, if you're religious, you're in violation of my covenant. If you're in violation of my covenant, then my provisions for life have been removed from you.
Right. You can't dwell in 2 houses.
So how do you get them back? Henna's the answer.
Yeah.
Look
That
up
pertains to the question I was going to ask you later about 1.5, because
look up and pay
where I
attention.
got into it, the same conclusion is if you just keep translating the words even deeper, he's real obvious about religion. It's all about religion.
So what I did is I said, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to track, because I think that henna was put here. It's key henna, and you know, key is not really an independent word by itself. It's tied to henna. It means surely henna, truly henna, indeed henna, because henna, for the reason henna. It's to emphasize henna. And so, henna, I thought, might hold the answer. How does God use henna? When does he use henna? What does he say with regard to henna? Now, first, how is henna written? Only 3 letters. It's not hard.
Should be a hey, man, and a hey, right?
That's it. What's a hey?
He is a person standing up, masculine in this position.
Reaching up and looking up, right?
Reaching up and beholding something.
What's the end
Seriously
hey?
looking. Seriously looking now.
The end hey is a feminine, a female looking up, reaching up.
Same thing, feminine position, right?
Standing up, looking up, reaching up. Do you know that the letter now called hey in Hebrew, which is this person standing up, reaching up, looking up to God? You know what the original name of that letter was?
Well, the original, far back as I go, is a hey, H-E-Y, like a hey.
Nope.
No?
No. That's the current name of the letter.
Okay.
Henna.
Oh, henna.
Henna. Do you know what hey means just by itself?
It means behold.
Behold. It means behold. Look up, reach up.
Observe, I guess.
That is correct. The letter itself is defined by its original name. Henna. It's depicted in the caricature. That individual that is drawn isn't just standing up and reaching up. They're henna, looking up and paying attention. So I track the use of henna. And you know the first time it's used?
Let me guess here.
Yeah, we talked about violence here, and that God wanted to resolve the fact that mankind had become overly violent. How about that for a clue?
Well, again, unless you're talking about Noah or something.
You got it.
Really?
First time he uses it, he's talking to Noah.
Well, that makes it extremely pertinent as we're in the 6 days of Noah's, something just like Noah's days.
Right. And he says to Noah, hey, henna, look up now and pay attention.
Interesting.
Man has become so vicious, so violent. I've got to come to a resolution here. And of course, then he presents to Noah a set of instructions. And he tells Noah, if you follow these instructions, you're going to live, and so is your family. And Noah did exactly what God said. And God delivered exactly as he promised.
Yeah.
And then Yahowah called that a covenant. Now there is a hell of a clue as to how you get it back.
Yeah.
As to what it is and how you get it back. Now, I did not know when the second occurrence of henna was going to be, but it is in a really interesting place. You know one of the stories that comes up almost immediately after the flood?
Abraham?
No. Oh, no, there's an intervening story.
We got to go through, wait a minute, we got to go through Nimrod and...
Oh, yeah, Babel.
Babel, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about man language and man being capable of doing whatever he pleases. And then God saying, I think we're going to need to confuse the language here. We don't confuse the language. Man will do whatever he pleases. And that ain't a good thing, because we'll be right back to where we were before the flood. And so God uses behold in his depiction of Babel, of corrupting confusion, particularly using words. Now, the next time Babel comes up, it comes up in relation to the meetings that Yahowah had with Abraham. And it's not in every meeting, but it's in most all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And most all of the time, it's Abraham didn't get it. And God's saying, Hannah, look up. Pay attention.
Point it.
Now, I've been going through this, and it's going to end up being 70, 80 pages by the time I'm done, and I'm going to backtrack now and do things that I had skipped over as I went through it. So I'm a long way from being completed with this, and this what I'm going to read to you now will create the false impression that I'm much further along, because I'm really not. I'm going to have to do some backtracking here. But I wanted to share what happened during the last meeting between Yahowah and Abraham. First of all, do you know how many times that Yahowah and Abraham met? I'll give you one guess. Only one answer counts. 7. I met 7 times. Yeah, I met 7 times.
I think there's a teaching element.
This is what we read. This is the beginning of chapter 22. This is the beginning of the 7th meeting. 7th meeting hadn't taken place at this point. This is the preamble to the 7th meeting. And it came to exist after these words that the Almighty attempted to ascertain the understanding and examine the appropriateness of the response by testing Abraham. Now, I translated that, guys, and I might have had the single biggest exclamation of the 15 years I've been doing this. The reasons are many. This evaluation came after these conversations between Yahowah and Abraham regarding the covenant. And therefore, the test would be based upon 1, how well Abraham had listened. 2, how well he had retained and thus remembered. 3, to what degree he understood what had been conveyed. 4, whether he had acted appropriately in response to what God said. And 5, whether or not his decisions had been correct and his reply sincere. Now, I've been a lone voice calling out in the wilderness saying this very thing, especially regarding the conditions of the covenant for a better part of a decade. Yahowah gave us His Torah to teach us about Him and to guide us to Him. It is filled with vital information and instructions that we need to know, to understand, to accept, and to act upon if we want to engage in a relationship and receive His provision for life. Not only are there right and wrong answers, nothing is more important than responding correctly, and equally important. The answers to the test Yahowah was conducting were provided by Yahowah during His conversations with Abraham. Now, since faith is a substitute for knowing, it cannot be evaluated. Unless information and instruction leading to knowledge and understanding were the issue, there could not have been a test. Moreover, if the criterion had been obedience to a set of laws, there would have been a trial based upon prior behavior rather than an evaluation of forthcoming actions. Therefore, the basis of Christianity is wrong, as is Judaism. Let me say this again. There is no objective test for faith, but there is for knowledge. There are right and wrong answers. Our prior actions can be tried, and they can be judged, but never tested. This was not a trial. It was a test. It was not based upon prior obedience or compliance. Let me read the verb again. And it came to exist after these words, following these statements and conversations, that the Almighty, Ha Elohim, attempted to ascertain the understanding and examine the appropriateness of the response by testing Abraham. Naka Eth wanted proof of the education, knowledge, and comprehension, and considering the consequences, decided to evaluate the acumen, judgment, ability to make rational decisions, and the validity of the forthcoming actions during a situation involving challenging circumstances so as to assess Abraham. It was written in the Peel Perfect. What that means is during a finite period of time, the object, Abraham, would suffer the effect of a complete test and would be totally influenced by the result. You know, I had thought that the 119th Psalm was a comprehensive and irrefutable affirmation that our judgment and conclusions regarding the Torah and its covenant were accurate, that it existed as teaching and instruction, that we are to observe so as to know, think about so as to understand, accept, and then respond to. And it is our knowledge, understanding, acceptance, and engagement based upon those instructions that determines whether or not we're part of the covenant or not. And the covenant is the only means to uphold life. I thought that was the gist of the story that Yahowah told to Abraham. I thought that was the gist of what Dode had written about the Torah. And I don't know why. And all of the writings that I have done about the covenant, that I did not somehow see, understand, properly perceive this statement in the opening book of the Torah, Barishith, in the beginning, Genesis 22:1. I don't know how I missed it. But this says exactly that. If you think of now everything that God has discussed with Abraham thus far, the conditions he's outlined for Abraham's participation, the benefits he has provided, Abraham's response. He's now saying, based upon everything that I've said, I'm now going to establish a means to evaluate whether or not he remembered, whether he listened, remembered, understood, is properly accepted, and will appropriately act based upon all of this. And I'm going to create a challenging circumstance to determine the genuineness of all of this. Did he understand? Will he respond appropriately? You could not have a more definite affirmation that what I think is the single most important insight of these 15 years of writing, 15 years of translating, 15 years of composing these books and of doing these shows, my assessment is the single most important insight that we have provided thus far is that the covenant is the only means to uphold life. It's the only way to establish a relationship with God. It has 5 terms and conditions which must be known, understood, accepted, and acted upon to participate in the covenant. The third condition of the covenant requires our attendance at the first 4 mikre, and that It empowers our ability to participate in and be productive in the final three. And that the first condition of the covenant, its lone prerequisite, is that we must first stop being religious. And that if we're not willing to walk away from the family of man and to cease being religious, there is no opportunity. God's statement in Yahowah 3:1, followed by this one now in Bereshit 22:1, affirms that that's all correct. I don't think there's anyone else on the planet outside of the group that has joined the covenant through these translations, these shows, these writings, that understands, that's even talking about the fact that there are 5 terms and conditions of the covenant that must be known, understood, accepted, and correctly acted upon, and that they include walking away, disassociating from all things religious, coming to know and understand Yahowah's testimonies so that you can trust and rely on him, to walk to him so that he can perfect us through Pesach and Matzah, leading to B'Koram being adopted into his family, and then empowered and enriched. And that the only way for us to know these things is to closely examine and carefully consider the terms and conditions of the covenant, and to show that we are committed, to show that we're willing to act, to demonstrate that we understand. We're to circumcise our sons so that they can remember, and so that we can remember. I don't think there's any place else that is being presented. And yet, there is nothing more important. It's the fulcrum upon which life pivots. There's only one covenant, and you're either in harmony with it or you're in conflict with it. And there's only 5 conditions and there's 5 benefits. Why is it? A lot of smart people around in this world.
Yeah.
A lot of well-read people around in this world.
And it's pretty plainly written, too.
Yeah. A lot of people smarter than you and I.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people know more than you and I. With this being the only means to sustain life, with this being the only way to engage in a relationship with the creator of the universe, with immortality and perfection and adoption into Yahowah's family, infinite enrichment and empowerment at stake. Why are there less than 1,000 people that even know about this?
It's beyond sad.
You know, when I was absent for the systemic poison ivy 2 weeks ago, you guys decided, why don't we just go to the basics? Let's talk about the terms and conditions of the covenant.
Yes.
What are they?
What
do they mean?
Sure.
Yeah, what do they mean?
Yeah.
How do we
participate?
How do we respond to them?
Yeah.
Why is it appropriate? Why do we have to respond? I mean, Yahowah was going to test Abraham, not going to try him. And that's profound. That means that faith is irrelevant. There is no test for faith. There's no right and wrong for faith. And that means that it couldn't be obedience to a set of laws because you don't test that, particularly in the future. You try it based upon past behavior. And it renders every other interpretation of Yahowah's witness moot.
It also reinforces the Torah being a teaching instrument.
Correct.
Teacher's test.
Correct. Correct. absolutely correct. And let me say it again, correct. It's all that matters. What did Yahowah say of Abraham when Abraham finally understood and got the correct answer? What did he say about Abraham? He said, you are
a tzaddik. You are
right.
perfect in my eyes.
I'm going to consider you right based upon this. What did Yahowah say of the flawed individual known as Dode, called David? What did he say about him?
He said he was tzaddik. He understood this. He responded appropriately.
He was right. He was right.
What is the same thing of you and I?
Tzedek has two connotations. They're both related, but related in a way that most people don't understand. The primary meaning of tzedek means right.
Mm-hmm.
What's the secondary meaning? Very closely related. No, very closely related. In fact, it's
right is upright, is straight.
It's essentially identical to henna.
Henna? Well, it means upright like the hay, of course.
Right.
Good, yeah.
Yep. Now, why do you think that upright is synonymous with right as it relates to the only test that matters when it comes to our relationship with Yahowah and our his ability to support life? Upright. Mm-hmm. It's because the alternative in religion, you are told to bow down.
Right.
And in a relationship, you stand upright, walk together,
yes,
side by side.
Yeah.
That is the difference. If you are upright in Yahowah's presence, you understand that it's a relationship. If you're bowed down, you've got it all wrong.
And don't you think in all these 22 letters he would have put a little character bowing down if he felt that was important?
Yeah. Kirk, at any time in your life, would you consider yourself physically strong?
Yeah, well, stronger than I am now when I was younger. But
all right. At the height of your strength, were you capable of lifting Yahowah up?
Hardly. No, don't be lifting.
No. What if you elicited every strong man in the world?
Couldn't do it.
What if you empowered every tool that man has ever developed?
There's no such a lever that can lift the world, much less Yahowah.
Okay. So this idea of uplifting God by bowing down and prayer and praise, that's ridiculous, isn't it? Can't be done.
And whose hand is reaching down to do what?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on.
Now, is it possible for a father to lift a child?
Yes, indeed.
Can a child lift the father?
Hardly.
No. So, what Yahowah is trying to say is, I'm your heavenly Father. I want to lift you up.
Yeah.
If you try to lift me up, this is stupid. And it's demeaning to think that I would create an inferior being for the purposes of lifting me up, of praising me. But it is absolutely moral that I would create an inferior being for the purpose of enhancing that being, of enriching that being, of doing everything I can to lift that being up.
Right. And now we know even more clearly that this lifting up is so beyond just making our lives better, so-called. We're thinking, when you start thinking in terms of dimensions, he's trying to turn you into light.
Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah.
This is just...
I told you that henna was two hays and a nun. Two hays on either side of a nun. What's the nun in Hebrew?
The nun is the inheritance, the future family.
Drawn in the form of what?
Sperm. Sure.
Sperm. So if you stand up, you can become God's child. Inherit all that he has to give. Do you know of another word, maybe a verb, that has two hays and a letter in between?
Hiya.
The basis of Yahowah's name. How about Yahowah's name?
Is that two hays too?